Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination goes a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 71 with thriller writer Richard Rippon. We've got another review in Book Bloggers Corner from one of our regular bloggers, Bibliomaniac, Catherine Sunderland. We've also got a new occasional feature that I'm trying to introduce to the show called Listener Spotlight, where I shine a light on one of our listeners and their most recent writing projects. Before we get into all of that, a very quick catch up from me. I'm continuing to chip away at my latest list of edits on my debut novel Safe Hands, and it's been in turns exciting, frustrating, thought-provoking and sometimes satisfying to watch some scenes and themes really starting to tighten up and to start looking like an actual novel that other human beings can read, maybe. And that is my next milestone. As a bare minimum, I need to get the book in at least some kind of readable state so that I can share it with the incredibly generous, should I say, and well-meaning people who have offered to be my beta readers. But whilst I toil away through my edits and things, I also wanted to air some of the self-doubt and second thoughts I've been having about how exactly I should get the book out into the wild, so to speak. Regular listeners may remember I've set myself a goal of independently publishing the book by June this year, 2018, as I record this. But now I'm starting to question if indie publishing is right for me at the moment. I've got a very busy job that can take me away from home for long stretches of time. And to be honest, fitting in just the actual writing, not to mention my family and things like this podcast, can be really difficult at times, and adding all of the extra work involved in self-publishing my first book may be a bridge too far. To add further doubt, I've had more than one off-air conversation with a couple of my guests, and they've suggested I try the traditional route first. And to be fair, those authors in question were both traditionally published, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't swayed by their arguments. I know that many of you listening to the show are indie authors, traditionally published authors, or aspiring authors like me. So what are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, how did you make the decision to do things the way that you're doing it? Have you got any advice you can offer? I'd love to hear from you, so please get in touch. You can tweet me at JU Podcast or drop me a line, wayne@waynekellywrites.com. Anyway, enough moaning. Let's get on with today's interview, a chat with Richard Rippon. Richard has been writing since 2007 when his short story Full Tilt was longlisted for a Criminal Shorts Award. In 2009 he won a New Writing North Award for his first novel The Kebab King, which was independently published, and you can find that on Amazon right now. Since then, he's had a number of short stories published in newspapers, magazines and articles before publishing his most recent novel, Lord of the Dead, with friends of the show, Obliterati Press. I've read the book and I loved it, and it was great to chat to Richard. Thanks, Rich, for joining us on Joined Up Writing Podcast. Appreciate you taking the time to do it. How's everything been going since the launch of the book?
Really well, thanks. Yeah, I've been delighted with the response from the book so far. I'm getting lots of good feedback, which is all really encouraging, and it's kind of spurred me on to work on the sequel, which is what I'm working on now.
Brilliant. Well, why don't you start off just telling us, for those people that don't know, the book that I'm talking about is Lord of the Dead. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how it came about?
Yeah, okay. Lord of the Dead is it's a crime thriller set in the northeast of England, and it's a kind of serial killer story in the vein of Silence of the Lambs. So a serial killer's taken women from the city and dismembering them in kind of a horrible fashion in the Northumbrian countryside. And my main character, John Atherton, is a criminal psychologist who joins the police team to try and track him down. But things are kind of complicated by the fact that he's previously had an affair with DS Kid Prejean, who's leading the police team, and he's married with a kid, so it's all about him trying to hold together a pressured family life while also using his skills to catch the killer. I think that's the crutch of it.
Yeah, it's good. I've read it and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really tense all the way through, and it was I flew through it. So congratulations, it's excellent. So what was the actual what was the inspiration for the story? Where did it sort of come from in the first place? What got you thinking about this? Obviously, it's quite a dark subject matter.
I think it was just kind of a clash of ideas, really. I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to write something that was of this nature, but kind of something a bit sort of gritty and dark, set in the northeast. So I wanted to be set in the area I'm from, but I didn't want it to feel kind of parochial. I wanted it to feel a bit sort of gritty and dark, as if it could have come from, a city in America. I wanted to have this kind of dark serial killer story, but it was also I'd also read a book many years ago, which was to do with Egyptology. So not to give away too much about the plot, but it was a clash of the themes of that Egyptology book running up against the serial killer idea. And once I'd kind of come up with that, that was pretty much my plot laid out for me there.
Well, it works really, really well. I mean, one of the things you mentioned there about the fact that it's obviously set in your neck of the woods. What, again, was that just, why were you so passionate about that? I know it sounds like an obvious question, but lots of people don't set the books where they come from, especially if it's not London or Manchester.
Yeah, sure. I think it's just because we've got a great we've got some great countryside around here, and I think a lot of it's kind of very sort of cinematic. We've got sweeping coastlines going all the way up from where I am, which is southeast Northumberland, right the way up to the borders of Scotland, and it's just an amazing part of the world, really. So I kind of wanted to include that, but also give a smattering of the Newcastle city centre as well. And a lot of the feedback I've had is how people kind of like hearing about that and like reading about Northumberland and this area. So that's kind of informed where I'm going with the sequel a little bit, in that I want to bring that a lot more to the fore and have these kind of recognisable places pop up in the novel.
It's good, and the thing I noticed, I commented on it when I reviewed the book, was the dialogue is really, really good. It's really, really authentic, and again, you're not overdone it, because a lot of the time, it's probably because you're from that area, but a lot of the time when people write about regional accents or that kind of thing, they tend to over egg the pudding a bit and go a bit over the top with the YIs and all that kind of thing. But you could get it from the rhythm of the speech rather than the specifics. I thought that worked really well.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I could have gone full blown sort of Irvine Welsh style with it, but I think if the accent does come over in the speech, I think it's just because it's been kind of ingrained in there, and when I've been kind of thinking of the characters talk, and it's kind of it's been run through my Geordie mind, and that's kind of how it's come out in the dialogue on the page.
It's good. Well, one of the things we haven't kind of mentioned, and it's good, the fact that it doesn't specifically come up in the blurb or anything like that, is one of your main characters, John Atherton, as you mentioned, he's got cerebral palsy. What made you decide to give one of your characters kind of this kind of physical vulnerability, and kind of what kind of inspired that?
Well, when I started to think about how the main character might be, I just came upon the idea of him being a little bit like my Uncle Jim, who's kind of this. He's a really intelligent guy, and he's got a very funny turn of phrase, a little bit sort of irreverent. And I kind of thought, oh well, that would be quite nice to have a guy like that, to add a bit of spark to the story. But Uncle Jim also happens to have cerebral palsy. So when I started to think about that, it felt a little bit wrong just to cherry pick the things I wanted to from his character, and not kind of include the disability. So that's why I decided that my main character had to have cerebral palsy too. and that kind of, you know, shaped the character a bit. It meant that he probably couldn't be a cop, which is how I first envisaged him. And it also meant kind of thinking about how things might have been for him growing up, you know, how his parents, you know, helped him with this issue and so on. And the more I kind of thought about it, the more sort of passionate I felt about him continuing to have this this disability in the story. Because I read something which said that of the 24 official James Bond villains, 17 have a disability of some kind. So you kind of have this idea that somebody who's physically different means that they're evil or bad. And also it's something that's woefully underrepresented on TV. There's only about 2.5% of people have a disability on TV compared to about 19% in the real world. So it's a group that's woefully underrepresented, and when they are, they're usually kind of sidelined to being a quirky best friend, or, you know, they're the assistant in the forensics lab, or something like that. And I wanted my disabled character to be front and center and leading the story, and, you know, definitely not the villain. He's the hero of the piece.
But again, it works really well, and I sort of had an inkling that it might be based on kind of personal experience, because it's kind of very subtle. You know, you don't hit us over the head with it in the first few pages and make it like really obvious. You know, this kind of something, but you don't know what it is. And again, it doesn't define who he is, which again, obviously, is just realistic. Obviously, disability doesn't define the person anyway. But again, that comes across really, really well. And the other thing that I thought worked well was, obviously, you've got a very strong female character in the book in Kate Prejean, isn't it? And it, you know, again, it kind of turns the kind of stereotype on its head. You've kind of got her. She's the strong female character, but she's also strong in the physical sense as well. She is kind of very physical, and she gets on with it, and she leads from the front and everything. And obviously, she's the cop character in the story. So again, I thought it was just an original spin on it, really.
Oh, thanks. So I'm glad you think that works, you know, because with Atherton's cerebral palsy, we probably wouldn't be sliding over car bonnets like Starsky and Hutch. So it kind of made sense for Kate to be the more physical one, and she's very resourceful, and she's athletic and kind of more practical than Atherton. She's all about the physical evidence rather than the psychology that Atherton obsesses over. And I think she even takes some of it with a pinch of salt, and thinks Atherton is sometimes being kind of overly speculative when she's all about the physical evidence that she can see. But she absolutely, she's more physical. She can handle herself. She's a force to be reckoned with, and I think she's somebody who kind of clashes with authority as well. But I think she's a good foil for Atherton in lots of ways. Yeah,
absolutely. So is your Uncle Jim still with us? Is he?
He is, yes.
What has he read the book? What does he think to it?
He's read the book. He enjoyed it. Yeah. He you know, although he's generally got quite a lot to say, he's you know, I need to catch up with him to hear his full unadulterated review, but he's generally quite happy with it, and I need to find out. I need to have a good long chat with him, but generally,
I didn't know whether you'd like run it past him from the point of view of, like, you know, I mean, obviously you've obviously known him a long time and all kind of thing, but I don't know whether there was anything in it as regards, you know, making sure it was kind of accurate, and there was nothing in there that was, you know, oh no, well that's not quite right or whatever. Whether you'd like run it past him as a fact checking thing or anything.
I did, you know, he did give it the once over before it was published. So he was generally kind of happy and with it from an authenticity point of view.
That's good.
But also, I found that Twitter's been invaluable when I've been writing, and that I managed to get in touch with somebody else who suffers from cerebral palsy, just to kind of have a second opinion on everything, and she was very helpful in just running through some ideas I had. And sort of giving me feedback on what, you know, would read as authentic and what wouldn't. So that was very helpful too.
Yes, it's great. So why don't we just go back a bit? So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you kind of came to write in the first place? What you know, how and why you write, sort of thing. What I know this isn't your first book that you've had out. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, writing's something I always wanted to do, and it was something I was all right at in school, but I never thought I'd be able to kind of do it properly or make a living from it. So I kind of shelved those ideas and aspirations. Then when my first daughter was born in 2007, I started writing short stories and just submitting them online to short story and flash fiction sites, of which there's, huge numbers. And it was really, gratifying and encouraging whenever one was accepted and they would post it online. And that's kind of where I started off. And I've always, if anybody ever asks, I always encourage people who are thinking about writing to start with short pieces like that, and little bits of short stories and stuff. And then I kind of entered a local crime short competition and went to a prize event, and there was some local crime authors there. There was Anne Cleve, who writes Vera in the Shetland series of books, and Val McDermott, who did Wire in the Blood and loads of other things. So that was great to see that there was some successful crime authors on the doorstep. And it was all kind of these little steps encouraging you all the way, kind of saying, well, you're not bad at this, keep going. And then in 2009, I won a New Writing Northern Promise Award for the first 3 chapters of a novel that went on to become The Kebab King, which is set in the Northeast, but it's about a private detective who's hunting down a missing girl. And because of that, I found an agent, Anne Williams from the Kate Horden agency, and she was really fantastic in helping me, shape the novel and complete it. But when it was done, we were kind of unlucky. We didn't find a publisher, so I self-published that one on Amazon for Kindle, and got started on what became Lord of the Dead.
Okay, let's take the first of our 2 breaks with a new occasional segment that I'm calling Listener Spotlight. Today I'm throwing some light on listener Gail Aldwin and her latest project, Paisley Shirt. So, settled in Dorset since 2006, Gail has lived in many different places, including outback Australia, Papua New Guinea and northern Spain. She's got a background in teaching and delivers creative writing workshops to young people and adults in community settings. In 2018, she accepted a post as visiting tutor with Arts University Bournemouth, working on the creative writing BA. Gail is also chair of the Dorset Writers Network. She's won numerous prizes for her flash fiction, short stories and poetry, and her work can be found online at Ink, Sweat and Tears and Slam Chop, and in print anthologies including Flash Fiction Festival 1, Glitterary and The Last Word. Gail's latest project is Paisley Shirt, a collection of short fiction that brings together stories that have been published online and in print anthologies. It contains 27 fascinating stories that reveal the extraordinary nature of people and places. Through a variety of characters and voices, these stories lay bare the human experience and what it's like to live in our world. And it's already had some great reviews, including from author of The Chicken Soup Murder, Maria Donovan, who described the book as a collection of great depth and variety, packed with emotional integrity. Gail Aldwin's flash fictions are sensitive, surprising, unnerving, tender and crucial. So that's great. I'll make sure to include all of the relevant links in the show notes, but you can find Paisley Shirt on Amazon right now. Follow Gail on Twitter at Gail Aldwin, and you can also check out Gail's blog at gailaldwin.wordpress.com. There you go. That was our very first listener spotlight. So if you want to be considered for a future show, tweet us at JU Podcast or drop me a line at wayne@waynekellyWrites.com and I'll send you some more info. Let's get back to my chat now with Richard Rippon, where I asked Richard why there was such a big gap between his first and second books. But obviously there's quite a big gap between The Kebab King and Lord of the Dead, so was that just a case of it was getting the idea together, or was it fitting your writing around you? You've got quite a busy day job as well, haven't you?
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's just finding the time. Basically, as you know, I work full time as a copywriter for a marketing and communications company in Newcastle, which I love doing. But it's just kind of, and I'm married as well with 2 daughters, so it's busy kind of family life too. So it's just finding these snatches of time to to write. So I think that's what took me so long. And most of Lord of the Dead, I wrote kind of on the bus going backwards and forwards from my previous job. So it was like just these snatches of time. And then it's the challenge is kind of trying to put it all together to make it into a cohesive book at the end of all that. But yeah, it's still that way now, and it would be great to have longer stretches of time to work on it. But I think you're right with you deal with what you've got, really.
Absolutely. And how did you find that? You mentioned that process, because that is really difficult. I know exactly what you mean when you say you're writing it in bits and pieces, and then you have to kind of, when you revisit it for the editing and the redrafting process, it's like some of it always inevitably feels a bit disparate. So how do you tackle that? How do you find editing and stuff like that?
It's once I've got the kind of raw material, and even if I do go off on tangents, and it always happens, I've found when I've pulled together Lord of the Dead, I remember a piece where I killed off a character in one scene, and then I'd written about him again, and he was alive and kicking in a few chapters time, which is horrendous, Yeah, it's and when you first put a first draft together, you're going to find all these problems and hopefully iron them out. But what I've found is, I would write kind of longhand and just fill in notebooks. And when I come to type things up, there's an editing step right there before you even go any further. So you can start to kind of correct some of these glaring errors before you go any further. So I guess, it's not ideal, but eventually it all does seem to come together.
So you like writing by hand then, or is it just a necessity thing from the point of view of where you're having to snatch your writing time?
Generally, that's the way I prefer to do it. Just to kind of scribble, because it just feels sort of looser. It's just so quick to be able to scratch something out and start again. But I guess it just depends on where I am. Sometimes I write little pieces on my phone if I'm on a crowded metro train, and I haven't even got to get my notepad out, and I'll maybe just email myself something. It might just be an idea, it might be a snatch of dialogue, it might just be a couple of lines, but it's all worth recording as you think of them. And as I say, it's just kind of pulling it all together periodically, or waiting until you've got a big batch and typing it all up and trying to edit as much as you can as you go.
So tell me a little bit about your experience. Obviously, you're published. Lord of the Dead is published with the small press Obliterati. Obviously, we're quite familiar with those guys because we've had Nathan and Wayne on the show at various different times. We've talked a little bit about Obliterati. So tell me about how that came about and kind of how you found the experience working with a small press.
All right, yeah. Well, so we kind of finished Lord of the Dead, and my agent was going around a lot of the bigger publishers, and there was some interest there, to the point where we started to talk about sequel ideas and maybe alternative names for the book. But finally, they sort of came back and said, we really like it, but can you make the female character the main character? And I thought, right, okay, well, for the amount of work that would involve, why don't you go and write that novel? So I think at that point I felt a little bit disillusioned, and I felt like I couldn't have got much closer to being published than not being published, So I took a bit of a break from writing, and then out the blue, Nathan from Obliterati got in touch, who I'd got to know during my time in Liverpool, but I hadn't spoken to for 20 years. And I knew he'd had books published through a small indie press, and he told me about his plans for Obliterati and asked if I had anything ready to read, and so I sent him Lord of the Dead, and they liked it, and it was the first book that they published in November last year, so that was absolutely fantastic, and they've been great to work with.
Yeah, they're nice chaps as well, which helps, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think just because they're writers as well, they've got an understanding of the work that goes into writing a book, and I think they're a little bit more kind of respectful of the work as well. They're not going to ask you to sort of bend it out of shape to fit their, any preconceived notion of what might sell more units in Asda, that kind of thing. My experience of working with those guys has been fantastic.
And you're working on the sequel now as we speak.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm working on a sequel of what I hopefully will be, the second of a trilogy. So I've got quite a strong idea of where things are going to go. It's kind of early days with my writing so far. It's going to be called Life of the Flesh. It'll catch up with the surviving characters from the first book. Mm-hmm. And I've got a very different adversary for them. And I think the events of the first book have affected all of them in different ways, and Atherton finds himself in a very different place to where we found him in the first book. I'm really kind of getting stuck into that now, but I'm realistic. It's going to take quite a while to do. And I'm just trying to listen to what people are telling me about the first book, and a lot of people have said it's it's really fast paced, and I'm kind of glad it is. But with this new book, I want to give the characters a little bit more space so I can go into them in more depth. So just to kind of build on the characters that I've established in the first one, but add a few new characters and a few surprises as well.
I guess that's one of the benefits of doing a series or more than one book, is that you can give them that time to develop a bit. It's a bit like with a box set on TV, isn't it, rather than just a one hit film or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, you have that space to sort of try them out in different ways and demonstrate different aspects of the character and hopefully give them a lot more depth. So that's the plan.
And so how do you tend to work? Do you tend to plot really, really deeply, or do you just pretty much go, well, I've kind of got this idea for something and just run with it?
I think I'm a bit of a plotter, I suppose, in that I know where I want to get to. Mm-hmm. And I've got in mind a lot of the big beats I want to hit on the way there. And the challenge, I guess, is to make it, part of the fun is making it a convincing and rewarding journey to get to where I want to go. But I think all the time when I'm thinking about the story and researching, I end up coming up with a bunch of other ideas that can sometimes be worked into the plot. Mm-hmm. So that's it really. So I think I do know where I want to go, but there's a little bit of flying by the seat of the pants as well in terms of how to get there.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I liked in Lord of the Dead was the POV. It's obviously difficult without giving too much away. We don't want to give any spoilers away. But obviously, there's something you do with the point of view. We kind of get to see both sides of the coin, if you like. How did that sort of come about? Was that just something that you knew from the get-go that you were going to go, or did it come up? Part of the writing, you thought, actually, I want to kind of know what the antagonist of the book is kind of thinking or what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's something I knew I felt I had to do just to get to know them with a little bit of depth. I was going to have to reveal something from their point of view, and the difficult part, I think, is kind of knowing when to drop that in. Because if you leave it too late, it just feels really tacked on, and I think you lose a lot of the authenticity. But if it's too early, then I think it removes a lot of the mystery. So I think it's something I knew I was going to want to do, but it was finding out how and when to do that.
It's in first person, isn't it? The other POV, is that right?
No. I think it's in second person.
Oh, second person. Okay, it's been a while since I read it a few months ago. Right. Okay. Well, that's really difficult to write in, or can be. Did you try it more than one different way, or did that just seem natural at the time?
It just seemed natural. I think I just wrote it in second person, as in he did this, he was thinking that, he did that, and without revealing too much of who he actually was, and so that seemed to work out quite well.
It does work well. The suspense is there all the way through, and obviously it's quite there is quite a lot of violence in the book, as you'd expect given the subject matter. How do you tend to approach that? Are you kind of quite a squeamish person by nature yourself, or?
No, I'm a big movie fan in general, but I love horror films. I've kind of raised myself on horror films, so that aspect comes quite naturally to me. That's going to make me sound really sick, isn't it?
Well, no, you're a writer. That's a given.
So that didn't really worry me too much. I think I didn't want it to come over too gory and too exploitative, but I didn't want to shy away from from the actual killings and what was going on.
Well, I think it's fair to say that people that are into that genre of books, it's kind of an expectation there that there's going to be some of that in there. I mean, that's why a lot of people like those books in the first place.
Yeah. I think that there's got to be some kind of payoff if it's from a suspense or a gory point of view, or whatever that.
Because it's quite funny, because I don't know whether you've had a chance to watch it, but on Netflix, Mindhunter. I don't know.
Yes, yeah,
absolutely. which I really, really liked. But I have seen quite a few negative comments on social media and stuff with people that were expecting it to be something else, and the fact there isn't a great deal of gore or violence in it, because it's not really about that. It's kind of about the aftermath, isn't it? A lot of those kind of people are like, oh, I've watched 3 episodes and nobody's been killed. I haven't seen any violence or anything yet. So, so it is like you say. I think if you're going to set yourself up to write in a certain genre, whether that's horror, comedy, whatever it is, there are certain expectations of the genre, and you've kind of got to, you've got to bear that in mind, and you've got to deliver certain things, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so. I did love that series, by the way.
I did, yeah.
I read that it was kind of like it had a vibe of Mad Men about it in terms of capturing a particular point particular point in American history, and it was fascinating, really, really, really good and brilliantly written, I thought.
Yeah, because it's fairly recent history, isn't it? Like late 70s, early 80s, isn't it? I think it's set.
Yeah.
And I think the surprising thing to me was I hadn't really realised that the term serial killer hadn't been coined then.
Yeah, there's a great moment, isn't there, where they just define the term serial killer, and you realise, oh wow, they didn't have a term for it until that point.
Yeah, and just the way that they're actually thinking about the whole psychology behind it. Obviously, the general consensus then was, you're born either good or bad. You're either evil or you're good, and that's it, kind of thing.
That's as far as the thinking went.
Yeah. So it is. I recommend it to anybody that's listening. It is really, really good. Well, speaking of that, inspirations and stuff. What kind of inspirations do you have from both books and films? Where do your inspirations come? I mean, why do you obviously particularly write in the crime genre?
I don't. Well, it's a bit embarrassing, but I don't read a huge amount of crime fiction. Mm-hmm. I kind of enjoy Val McDermott and Thomas Harris. That probably comes over in my book. Yeah,
Silence the Lambs.
Yeah, but generally I just kind of like literary fiction, so stuff like Bret Easton Ellis, Cormac McCarthy. Mm-hmm. Chuck Palahniuk, Doug Coupland, Irvin Welsh. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, that's kind of generally the type of stuff that I read for enjoyment. So I don't know if that's informed my writing in any way, but that's kind of what I enjoy. But at the moment, if I am reading anything, it's usually for research purposes at the minute. So a lot of kind of non-fiction and stuff like that. But as for what influenced Lord of the Dead, I was kind of obsessing over the Michael Mann movie, Manhunter.
Oh, great film, yeah.
Yeah, so there was that, and I was listening to a lot of Nick Cave, which was I think that was kind of informing it a little bit, the sort of red right hand kind of mythology was sort of in the back of my mind. So yeah, probably a clash of those two things, and kind of wanted to make it feel as if it was quite a cinematic book as well. I think that all helped to inform it.
Okay, one more quick break to grab a review in this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week it's Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac, reviewing Elmet by Fiona Mosley.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
Elmet by Fiona Mosley was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. It's a modern-day fairy tale, a contemporary fable, and a novel that echoes the prose of literary classics, but with the freshness and a poignancy that makes it unforgettable and powerful. The story is set in a small place called Elmet in the wilds of Yorkshire. Although this is a fictitious location, Elmet was actually the last independent Celtic kingdom in England. In the epigram at the beginning of the book, Mosley quotes Ted Hughes, who refers to Elmet as a badlands and a sanctuary for refugees from the law. This helps establish the atmosphere of the book and some of the themes it will explore. Daniel, his sister Cathy and their father are a tight-knit family who are self-sufficient and live off the land. Their father teaches them how to hunt, kill and survive in the woods, and they are reliant on nothing but their own physical strength and instinct to survive. Without the continuous mention or reference to gadgets and devices used daily in modern life, this book feels as if it could belong in the past, but actually it's set in contemporary times and the concerns, themes and issues are relevant and important. The novel is narrated by 14-year-old Daniel, who is returning north in search of something. There are two narratives. The present-day chapters are written in italics, and the others, also narrated by Daniel, take us back and lead us through the events that precede the horrific catastrophe that has been foreshadowed by the ominous atmosphere and growing sense of violence. Despite Daniel and Cathy's contentment and satisfaction with their childhood spent roaming in the woods, occasional schooling and a strong relationship with their father, there is evidence that this will not continue forever. Every now and again their father disappears to fight. His anger and rage dissipates when back with them, but when a local landowner turns up on their doorstep claiming that the land is not his, this sanctuary he's created doesn't belong to him, then this capacity for violence is awakened in the one place the children thought they were safe. This is a beautifully written, poetic and mesmerising read, with descriptions, images and sentences that are nothing short of brilliant. For the most part, it's unassuming, simple and stark. Mosley's clever use of language captures the landscape, isolation and dynamics between the characters who believe they have found an idyllic way to live. Mosley's writing is understated but powerful, and as the novel journeys towards the end, it becomes bleak, powerful and haunting, with an ending that has to be one of the most shocking and horrific scenes I've ever read. Mosley's prose is so bare, raw and stunning that this book sweeps you up in its lyrical intensity. It leaves you breathless and battered and bereft. I was reminded of Ted Hughes, Thomas Hardy and of course the Yorkshire countryside always conjures the ghosts of the Brontes. But I was also reminded of Claire Fuller's Endless Numbers Days, as she is another writer who uses beautiful writing to describe complex and sinister stories. This is a highly memorable, truly engaging literary read. It draws on many influences and genres to tell a story full of depth, warning and tragedy. If you like Claire Fuller, John McGregor, Sarah Perry and books that are shortlisted for awards, then Elmet should be on your bookshelf this year.
Book Bloggers Corner.
There you go, that was a review of Elmet by Fiona Mosley by Catherine over at bibliomaniacuk.blogspot.co.uk, and I'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. So back to our final instalment of today's interview with Richard Rippon. Brilliant. Well, you kind of mentioned there, so you've got the rest of the trilogy that's up next, which you're working on now. I mean, obviously, coming back, having to fit your writing around your day job and everything else, have you kind of got any tips for all the people that are out there that are kind of doing the same thing? Because, I mean, even a lot of, kind of established writers still kind of have to write around some other form of job or, getting income in or whatever. So have you got any tips or anything for those people?
I guess, well, at the moment, I'm doing something called 100 Days of Writing, which was kind of inspired by another author, Jen Ashworth, who I think did it a little while back, and I kind of followed her doing that on Twitter and Instagram. And I've found that to be really useful in terms of, getting the discipline there to be able to, to think about your book every day. And it's not about word count or, it's not about, making sure you do so many words or so many pages per day. It's just doing something per day, anything. And I found that really, really useful just to kickstart things at the start of this year. So I would recommend doing something like that, I think that's been really, really helpful. In terms of kind of general practical advice, if I would just kind of try and vary where you write. I think I found that helpful as well.
That's a good tip.
There's been days where I've just kind of thought I've got nothing I haven't got anything. I've got no idea of where to take this now. And just simply by taking myself off to a different place for lunch, or, going to have a coffee somewhere that I haven't been before, usually just sparks something. You might just see somebody walk past in the street, or you might just spot a particular building through the window, and there might be enough there to kind of spark an idea, which you can weave into your story. So I think that might be good advice if you're getting a bit stuck.
That's really good advice. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the 100 Days of Writing for the epilogue, a little bonus question. But just to kind of round things up then, so where can people find you and your work online?
Yeah, well, Lord of the Dead and the Kebab King are both available on Amazon at the moment, and Lord of the Dead's also available on the Waterstones website.
Brilliant. And can they find you on Twitter or anywhere else?
You can find me on Twitter. I am at Rich Rippon. I tweet Brilliant. Quite a bit.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes as well. Well, for the time being, thanks a million, Rich. Appreciate you taking the time to do it.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks very much for having me on.
There you go, Richard Rippon, and I highly recommend his book, Lord of the Dead, available now on Obliterati Press, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. So thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly, happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up, right?